Happy Monday, Bullfrogs. All right, so we are on we're going to start our new book this week. It's book number 31. It's called Summer of the Sea Serpent. And we are just plugging along, getting lots of books read while we're at home learning. And this book is 12 chapters long, so we'll be able to finish this week. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1 is called Summer Solstice. Summer Solstice is the longest day of the year. Jack was sitting on the porch reading the newspaper. It was a warm summer day, but the porch was shady and cool. Annie poked her head out of the screen door. "Hey, Mom says she'll drive us to the lake this afternoon," she said. Jack didn't raise his eyes from the weather page. "Did you know today is the summer solstice?" he said. "What's that?" asked Annie. It's the official first day of summer," said Jack. "There's more daylight today than on any other day of the year." "Cool," said Annie. "Starting tomorrow, the days will get shorter and shorter," said Jack. A loud screech came from overhead. "Look," said Annie, "a seagull." Jack looked up. A large white gull was circling in the bright noon sky. "What's he doing here?" asked Jack. "The ocean's 2 hours away." The gull swooped down and screeched again. "Maybe he's a messenger from Morgan or Merlin," said Annie. "Maybe one of them sent him to tell us the treehouse is finally back." Jack's heart began to pound. He put down the newspaper. "You think so?" he asked. Jack and Annie hadn't seen the magic treehouse since their Merlin mission to a haunted castle last Halloween. Jack had begun to worry that the treehouse might never come back. "Look, he's flying toward the woods," said Annie. Jack jumped up. "Okay," he said, "let's go." "We'll be back soon, Mom," Annie called. Then she and Jack dashed across their yard. They ran down their street and into the Frog Creek woods. The shady woods were dappled with sunlight. The air smelled fresh and clean. Jack and Annie hurried past the leafy trees until they came to the tallest oak. High in the oak branches, the magic treehouse was waiting for them. "Wow," Jack and Annie said together. The treehouse looked exactly the same as when they'd last seen it. Annie grabbed the rope ladder and started up. Jack followed. When they climbed inside the treehouse, no one was there. "Look, our royal invitation is still here," said Annie. She picked up the card that had taken them to Camelot on Christmas Eve. "And our leaf from Merlin is still here," said Jack. He picked up the yellow autumn leaf that had sent them on their Halloween mission. "This is new," said Annie. She picked up a pale blue seashell. The shell was shaped like a small fan. There was writing on it. "Hey, this looks like Merlin's handwriting," said Annie. "We must be going on another mission for Merlin." She read aloud the message from the magician. And here's what it looks like. And here's what the message says. "To Jack and Annie of Frog Creek, on this summer solstice, journey to a land lost in mist, to a time even before Camelot. Follow my rhyme to complete your mission." And then signed -M. Annie looked up. "What rhyme?" she said. "Let me see." Jack took the shell from her and turned it over. On the other side was a poem. Jack read the poem aloud. We've been studying poems. This is cool. Here's the poem that was on the back. "Before night falls on this long summer day, a shining sword must find its way into your hands and out of the gloom, or Camelot's king shall meet his doom. To begin your quest for the sword of light, call for the help of the water knight. Then pass through the cave of the Spider Queen." "Spider Queen?" Annie interrupted. She frowned. Spiders were about the only thing she was afraid of. "Don't think about it now," said Jack. "Let's keep going." He read on. "Pass through the cave of the Spider Queen and swim with the Selkie clothed in green. Enter the cove of the stormy coast. Dive 'neath the cloak of the old gray ghost." Jack stopped reading. Old gray ghost, he said. Don't think about it now, said Annie. Keep going. Jack read more. Answer a question with love, not fear. With rhyme and sword, your home is near. Both Jack and Annie were silent for a moment. That's a lot to do before nightfall, Jack finally said. Yeah, said Annie. And I'm a little worried about the spider part. And the ghost part, said Jack. Hey, said Annie, if we're going on another Merlin mission, I'll bet Teddy will come with us. He can help us get through the scary parts. Right, said Jack. Just hearing Teddy's name made him feel braver. So, said Annie, onward? Onward was Teddy's favorite word. Onward, said Jack. He pointed to the handwriting on the pale blue shell. I wish we could go to the time before Camelot. The wind started to blow. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. I know y'all said that with me. I love it. All right, chapter 2, the water knight. Here's a picture. Chapter 2. A salty breeze blew into the treehouse. Seagulls screeched overhead. Jack and Annie looked out the treehouse window. They were high in the branches of a gnarled old tree. The tree was on a sea cliff beneath snow-capped mountains. The mountains overlooked a rocky coast. There was no sign of human life anywhere. It looks wild and lonely here, said Annie. Really lonely, said Jack. I wonder where Merlin and Teddy are. I don't know, said Annie. They were in the trunk of our tree last time. Let's look for them in this one. She climbed down the rope ladder. Jack crammed the seashell in his pocket and followed her. Merlin, Annie called. Teddy. Jack and Annie circled the gnarled tree trunk, but there was no sign of an entrance into the magic chamber of Merlin the magician. They circled the tree again. Jack tapped the bark in several places. I have a feeling no one lives inside this tree, said Annie. I think you're right, said Jack. Maybe they're down by the water, said Annie. Annie and Jack walked a few feet to the edge of the sea cliff and looked down at the rugged coast. They saw 3 coves separated from each other by rocky cliffs. The cliffs were filled with shadowy crags and the dark mouths of caves. In the first cove, sunlit water flowed from the open sea through a small space between the cliffs, then washed onto a pebbly shore. The second cove was smaller, but looked much like the first. The third cove was different. The farthest away, it was surrounded by a ring of bright green hills. A thin white mist hung over its milky green waters. I don't see any sign of Merlin or Teddy, said Jack. I guess we'll have to get started without them. Read the beginning of Merlin's rhyme again, said Annie. Jack took the shell from his pocket and read aloud. Before night falls on this long summer day, a shining sword must find its way into your hands and out of the gloom, or Camelot's king shall meet his doom. Jack looked up at the sky. The sun was almost directly overhead. It must be around noon now, he said. We don't have much time, said Annie. What do we do first? Jack looked back at the rhyme and read aloud. To begin your quest for this sword of light, call for the help of the water knight. Oh, easy, said Annie. It is? Said Jack. Sure, said Annie. If he's a water knight, he's probably down by the water. She started down the steep, rocky hill that led to the nearest cove. Jack stuffed the shell back in his pocket. But who is the water knight? He yelled as he followed Annie. It doesn't matter, she yelled back. We just have to go down to the water and call for his help. They climbed over large boulders toward the cove. The boulders were slippery, but Jack's sneakers kept him from sliding. A damp breeze blew from the sea. It made his skin and clothes feel clammy. When they got to the shore, Jack wiped the mist off his glasses and looked around. The wide beach was covered with silvery pebbles, shells, and rows of sea foam. Sandpipers and gulls picked at tangled ribbons of soggy seaweed. The tide must be out, said Jack. He studied the cliffs above the cove. I don't know how a knight can get down here. A horse can never make it over all those rocks. Let's just do what the rhyme tells us, said Annie, and see what happens. Annie stretched out her arms. She closed her eyes. She raised her head toward the sky and shouted, "Oh, water knight, whoever you are, come here and help Jack and Annie." "Oh, brother," Jack muttered to himself. Suddenly, they heard the wild cries of seagulls. "Jack, look," said Annie. She pointed toward the middle of the cove. Seabirds were screeching and flapping above a giant swirl of spray and foam. The swirl was spinning just above the surface of the water, headed toward the beach. "Wow," said Annie. She took off running across the sand. "Come back," shouted Jack. "No, come look," said Annie. Jack hurried to the edge of the surf. Through the blur of spinning spray and foam, he saw the silver helmet of a knight appear above the water. He saw silver breast armor. Then a strange creature burst through the surface, carrying the knight on its back. The creature had a horse's head and neck and front legs, but instead of back legs, it had a long, silvery fish's tail. With the water knight on its back, the horse creature half galloped and half swam through the cove. Seagulls shrieked wildly overhead, following the pair toward the shore. As the knight drew close to the edge of the water, he looked straight at Jack and Annie. He raised his gloved hand and beckoned to them. "Okay, we're coming," cried Annie. She started pulling off her sneakers. "Wait, let's think about this," cried Jack. "We don't have time," said Annie. "He wants to help us. He's like the stag that came for us in Camelot." "No, he isn't," said Jack. "He's much weirder." But Annie tossed her sneakers onto the rocks and splashed through the shallow water. The knight held out his hand and helped her onto the strange horse creature. The creature slapped its tailfish against the water, sending up a fountain of spray. "Come on, Jack," Annie yelled. "We can't waste time." Okay, wait till you see this picture. This is very cool. There's Jack and Annie. There's the fishtail. And then there is the water knight. Y'all see that? There's a lot to that picture. Annie's right, Jack thought. They had to find the Sword of Light before nightfall. He pulled off his sneakers and tossed them up onto the rocks near Annie's. Then he stepped into the cold water and waded out to the night. Annie helped pull Jack up onto the horse creature. He sat on its scaly tail and clung to Annie while she held on tightly to the water knight's tunic. The silvery fish's tail slapped the water. A shower of spray rained down on Jack. He closed his eyes. "Onward," he said faintly. The water knight turned away from the shore. With more slaps of its tail, the horse creature began galloping and swimming across the cove. The seagulls shrieked wildly as they swooped after them. Bumping up and down, Jack clung desperately to Annie. He kept his eyes squeezed shut and tried hard not to fall off. As they sped through the cove, the water knight guided his steed steadily over each ripple and wave. The bumpy ride soon turned into a smooth one. "This is great," cried Annie. Jack opened his eyes. With the wind and spray whipping in his face and hair, he began to feel more excited than scared. "I'll bet he's taking us to the Sword of Light," cried Annie. Whoops, sorry. "We'll be done with our mission in no time." That would be too easy, thought Jack. But as they sped over the waves, he grew hopeful. Maybe she's right. Maybe it will be easy, he thought. Not all our missions have to be hard. But what about the rest of the stuff in the rhyme? What about... Before Jack could finish his thought, the strange horse creature stopped and reared up. Jack and Annie tumbled over its fish's tail and splashed into the cold water. They sank for a moment and then bobbed back up to the surface, frantically treading water. They looked up at the water knight and his horse. The knight lifted his arm into the air. He pointed to a pile of boulders near the base of the nearby cliff. Then he spread his fingers of his gloved hand in a gesture of farewell. "Bye, thanks," shouted Annie. The horse creature slapped its fish's tail and took off in a fountain of spray and foam. With the gulls circling above them, the mysterious pair whirled toward the passage between the cliffs that led out to the sea. In a moment, they vanished into the open water beyond. All right, wow. This is so magical. Okay, so tomorrow, come back and we will read chapter 3, Cave of the Spider Queen. I don't like spiders either, so that should be interesting. Thank y'all for reading with me today. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.